And
just to refresh.
Going live, the Friday night Freightcar. How do you like that, folks? I chose Freightcar because it has an F like Friday.
Yeah,
because
your
we're
alliteration fetish.
And we're like trained. It's like a train metaphor that we have going on, analogy kind of thing. So we're live again on Friday night as we record this week for the podcast and try to get it done without a ridiculous amount of distractions from people. Background noises, that means you, Ginger, the wonder dog. And we're going to try to record our show about separation of church and state, a topic which is on everyone's minds, and that's why we're doing an episode called Church and State. And you notice if you ride the subway system, people, you get off at a stop called Church and State, and then maybe you're thinking that's the intersection of church and state, and you pop out, and that's where you are. But of course, these things are not supposed to intersect in America. They're supposed to run separate from each other. So in our little subway station, you get out and you go west, and you get out on State Street. If you go to the east side, you get out on Church, and they run parallel to each other. And you know, I thought of talking about that as a way to make sure that we weren't, implying that maybe church and state intersected in our virtual world. But when I read the book, whose author we will hear from a little bit later in the podcast, I read his book, and there's a quote that stood out from Alexis de Tocqueville. This is from 1835, commented after a visit to America. There is no country in the world where the Christian religion retains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. He emphasized, moreover, that American government and Protestantism seemed to flow together in one undivided current. He also noted that the strength of Protestantism he attributed to the very fact that America lacked official establishments, and we'll talk more about that. But I thought it was evocative, the undivided flowing in one current of American secular government on the one hand, and the overt Protestantism of the populace on the other hand. So church and state, in fact, do not really mix, but they run together side by side, parallel, as I stated, in America. And the whole thing has come to a point where now those parallel streams are actually trying to come together. We have a would-be theocrat government trying to enforce Christian laws on the rest of us who just really don't give a shit about their silly religion. How, in fact, and as we sit here, we have around the room, like the freight car's full. Look at that. We got unemployed cable guy Jason. Say hi, man.
Hello.
It's NPR voice guy Alex.
Good.
The unknown atheist with her face on tonight. It's not good. And Nikolai on science. Thanks for joining us. Alex, what do you got on the Federalist Papers? Why was separation of church and state implemented in America when the Constitution was written?
Well, I'm not. The more I read about this and more research that I have done, that really wasn't the case. I think that we would like to believe that we weren't established as a theocratic nation. And as it turns out, in researching more and more, the whole idea of the Constitution, and in Article 6, it specifically talks about no religious test in order to hold office. So when the Federalist Papers the Federalist Papers, you have to understand, does more to explain what is in the Constitution than what is not in the Constitution. And Madison and Jefferson were very concerned about, okay, no religious test, because there are so many different types of Christianity. And even though they knew there was a thing like Jews, even though they knew that there was such a thing as Islam, which they referred to as Mohammedans, and even though they acknowledged, though didn't necessarily respect the idea of non-believers, they didn't want to have to bind a nation which had been loosely put together through the Articles of Confederation, and have different religious tests for any supreme executive that would have to pass in all of the newly formed states. So that is the idea of no religious test. But later, the famous quotes from Jefferson about not letting the tyranny of a majority rule over a minority, he was very concerned about that. He was one of the framers of the Virginia statute on religious freedom. And in those articles were the articles that indeed were the basis of the First Amendment, because in those articles, they neither wanted to have any state-sponsored religion, because after all, everybody was English and now they were American. And in England, there was a head of the church, there was a church or a state-sanctioned religion. They didn't want that. And they wanted more freedom for the people. So the Federalist Papers explained that, but not directly. They basically punted to the states, and the states basically subservient to the Constitution and to the Bill of Rights that came after the Constitution. So when it is argued by theists that we are a nation formed on Christian values, kind of, and when we talk to secularists like ourselves that believe that there has to be a separation.
Something happened. Hold on. This thing just turned off.
Was it recording?
It was.
I don't think you can turn off when it's recording.
Forget to push the button.
If you get to the button.
Yeah, maybe.
Take two.
Go. Nice.
Glitching. That's all right. You're gone. We're good.
So it really is a difficult argument. It is an open argument that I think as secularists we want to believe, and we want to point back to the founding documents and say, no, we were indeed formed by atheists, but no, which isn't true. We have people who saw the need to separate church and state, but there was no explicit direction to do so.
The nation, the federal government disestablished religion, but left it up to each state, in fact, to disestablish or establish multiple religions or establish no religion. Some of them never had ones. The New England states especially always had one from the beginning, because that's really why they were founded. And one by one, they eventually all saw the wisdom of letting it go, because the states that never had one, Protestantism was evidentially spreading just as fast or faster than in states that still had an established religion. So the deep thinkers of the time understood, because of previous philosophy over the centuries and trial and error and the evolving relationship between the new sovereign state and the church. These are ideas that started with Aristotle and moved on up in different ways through the ages. As it turned out, America was the first one to actually implement it on any kind of real scale. But in the end, everybody in America was Protestant, and what they were talking about with disestablishment was making sure that every Protestant sect could worship Jesus Christ in the way that they wanted to, and not get in conflict with each other over the minutia of what's basically, they were all in lockstep with the whole, the Trinity, the dying and rising. You believe in Jesus, and you're saved, and you can order that worship any way you want. The states could do it, communities could do it, individual people could interpret the Bible and start a congregation and do it their own way. But everybody was on board with post-Calvinist Protestantism. Arminianism, lacking predestination, eventually became the mode of this new religion, in which stated that you could then decide if you wanted to be saved, you could accept Jesus Christ. If you didn't want to be saved, you didn't have to, and then you were screwed. But the fact that Christian theology includes universalism, that is, Christianity is one of the few modern religions that views itself as encompassing the entire world. Everybody in the universe that's ever existed is supposedly part of that body of Christ, and if they choose to come to him, they're saved. No other religions in the past were like that. They considered that the Vikings gods would take them home when they died, and the Jewish God would take them home when they died, or whatever. Every religion existed. Every god had his own means to get his people to salvation. It's not valid in Christianity, and that gives Christians their sense of entitlement, which gives them the right to think that they can proselytize to every asshole in the world. But it also makes it so that they don't establish a state religion to force people to convert, because A, that doesn't work, and B, it's against New Testament theology. The Jews have to come to Christ on their own, and if they refuse to do so, they remain of this carnal world. And so everybody was in lockstep with that philosophy when the religion, when the country was founded. There was no freedom of religion for Jews or Buddhists or Muslims or Hindus. That's not what they had in mind. So, Alex, you're right when you say that it wasn't really founded as a Christian country, but it was a de facto Puritan nation, and it has been from the beginning. So what do we do about that today? How do we fight that, Jason?
How do we fight it?
Yeah, how do we change it into actual separation these days when we know that there's 30% nuns and and 2% of everything else, Muslim, pagan, Buddhist, whatever.
And you have to be involved. You have to go out and tell your candidate of choice that you support them and these are your values and you'd like to see them take up for you, or you run yourself, or you find another candidate that supports your secularism. That's the only way, is by participating in the system, by not saying oh well, every candidate is religious. 99.9% of them are at least going to say they are, even though, what did you just say, 30% are non-believers? That's odd. Right?
Well, we've talked about that before. Are they going to start trusting, that they can pander? And that's why I went to the Democrats last night to try to get involved, because we need people to run for office. We need those who are secular, who are running, to go ahead and say they are, and we need the rest of the politicians to throw us a bone and pander to the secular community. But if we don't tell people we're out there,
well, you're hitting on part of the problem. Part of the problem that they had at the time of the founding is the same problem that we have now. Is the argument that they had, and if you read Federalist, I believe it's Federalist 10 and Federalist 50, they both infer that there is a moral foundation behind religion, which they argue on one side, but on the other side, they worry about you cannot establish a religion because that becomes a vehicle for subjugation of people.
Well, they were fleeing then, right? From England, the Church of England, the Quakers and the Puritans were viewed as religious extremists.
That was a big part of it. They didn't want another Church of England style.
Yeah, but in today's age, there's still a lot of confusion as to the source of morality. And even though we have great thinkers that can tell us that that's more of a function of education, that's more of a function of awareness of enlightenment, that it comes natively to us as human beings, and even in tribal societies. But the confusion that morality comes from religion, that is a huge issue that we have to overcome. Otherwise, it's going to continue to come up in politics, because you don't want to vote for a heathen. You don't want to vote for a non-believer.
Yeah, our morality evolves, right? The religion was used to propagate the slave trade and as a justification. Like, they're not real people. Those things without a morality that can evolve, you're never going to change and do better as a society.
One of the things I find interesting with say the Republican Party and religion is you can find parallels between their beliefs. I'm not saying all Republicans are racist, but definitely the majority of racists are within the Republican Party.
All right.
I would
Get
say
some comments on that one.
I would say
I'm saying that.
I would say the majority of Republicans are, people grow up Republican, who are Republican grow up as Republicans. They're indoctrinated with Republican beliefs, very much like people who grow up in religion are indoctrinated with religious beliefs. And so you can find these parallels between the Republican Party and religion. And this is why it seems also that the Republican Party they're more dogmatic in their beliefs. They're not, they don't tend to be open-minded about different things to science and, even philosophically, they seem to be very, they don't have any philosophical bending to learn new things.
I have no soul, man.
Well, okay, here's the irony. Here's the irony of that. In the time of Lincoln, the Republicans were considered the progressives.
They were the progressives.
And they were the ones that went against the moral teaching because Jefferson Davis was right that the Bible did, in fact, state that yes, owning slaves was was mandated by God, that it was affirmed by God. So the Republicans in those days went against that. So it has come.
That's true.
Even when we were kids, Alex, the Republicans weren't these right-wing freaks.
That's true.
They weren't all pro-life. There was plenty of pro-choice Republicans. People like Reagan and Bush Sr. were among them. I mean, that's,
Well, the pendulum swings, and the pendulum swings in such a way that party platforms swing and belief systems swing. But what we're talking about right now is the idea that church should not be involved in state. And when you have someone as early as 2 days ago, Mitt Romney, saying that his faith draws him to make a conclusion. No, that isn't a methodology by which you come to decisions.
Well, if he was talking, was he talking about voting against Ding Dong?
Yes.
Well, in that case, he was trying to say that he had to vote what he believed was right, his Christian conscience.
That's his
Wouldn't let him
vocabulary.
lie. Yeah, you know what I mean. So I'm going to give him a pass.
It
on that one,
also
'cause
helps.
He was the only fucker who did the right thing.
He also knows that insulates him. Because who
True.
can say, well, no, that's not what God
True.
wants.
No, it was shrewd.
No one's going to say
It was
that,
shrewd,
yeah.
but still, he didn't really have anything to gain by this, I don't think. So in my mind,
Honestly, it's like the first step of him growing a tiny bit of,
a little weenie.
a little bit. Because
Little-
Trump, really attacked him during the, his presidential run.
right.
There was that famous picture where Romney had to go to basically kiss the ring with Trump after he won the nomination, and he looked like a beaten dog, and everybody made fun of him and stuff. And this would be, ironic beaten dog with Romney in that story. But no, it's good to see that at least somebody. I mean, as much shit as that guy talks, Trump, why hasn't he made more enemies within the Republican Party?
I think they all need their jobs too bad. I don't know because that's the one thing about Mitt. He's rich enough where he doesn't care. If he's never a senator again, Trump doesn't scare Mitt Romney's money. So,
No, but the point that I'm making is, if as a juror, I made this decision based on the evidence, and this is the conclusion I came to, and to put in anything on faith, that faith is not evidence.
no, I think you're right. But I think maybe he just meant that he couldn't, because he was a religious, moral man. He couldn't lie. He couldn't go against, self. But you're right. I mean, what we need is to ask politicians if they base their decisions on reason, or if they pray to an invisible God that some of us don't believe in, that's of unverifiable use, if any. That's what we need to do, is go to the rallies, go to the get involved in the caucuses, go meet the candidates. When I stopped in for 5 minutes last night, I met 3 or 4 people that were running for local office. One of them was the Supreme Court of Wisconsin judge. His name was Falone, and he said good things to me when I said, "Where do you stand on separation of church and state?" And he knew. He right away rolled his eyes because he knew what's going on with the country. And there's lots of crap. There's lots of news out there. You got anything else to add, Nick?
No,
on
that
the
was
general topic.
Yeah.
I think it's threatened now more than ever because the Republican base is 100% beholden to the evangelical Christians that want to create a theocracy. That's their most important, issue. And that's the reason why they keep voting for Trump, is because he panders to them. He knows what he's doing. It's all calculated. He's never been a religious person throughout his entire life until now.
But is it too many eggs in one basket for those guys? Is that all they have?
That it's starting to become the biggest thing for the Republican Party.
It really is. And I thought the last cycle, when they screwed up so bad last time, that would be the end of them pandering to the Christian right. But they went the opposite. Trump at least went the opposite.
They vote.
Way.
That's the bit, and that's what we're trying to say. if you're secular, if that's not, if the direction of the country is not where you want it to go, if you believe in women's rights, if you believe in separation of church and state, vote. Honestly, vote Democrat. Don't vote third party.
If you don't want it to take 80 years to change,
do what
because
the religious right does and
come out and vote.
Yeah, and vote for a single candidate. All get together and vote for the candidate that best matches your.
Yes, we're not promoting any candidate. We're we're happy. You asked if we'd have a Republican on the show. Please show me a reasonable Republican who comes on the show and can talk about their atheism if we want to do that. We really try hard to keep the show and the podcast non-political and keep it on atheistic topics. And separation of church and state is a topic that atheists care about, so we can overlap there. But I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat. I want them to make decisions based on the best, humanistic, civil information and goals for everybody, not just the friggin' Christians, because there's just not that many of them anymore. There's really not.
The National Prayer Breakfast occurred this week, and it's a misnomer because it isn't just a breakfast, it's a week-long event. And President Trump took his victory lap at that event, and there were plenty of Democrats at that event as well as Republicans. When you think about the Christian right, it's the party of God. It is the American Hamas, as it were. And it has infiltrated both sides.
American Taliban.
As we discussed that movie, that series of documentaries on Netflix, The Family, it really is insipid. And no, they don't have all their eggs in one basket. They have multiple baskets. And it is all upon who aspires to their point of view. So someone like that, Ignacio Cortez, whatever the hell, that little communist name is, she's not invited to the thing, but plenty of other Democrats are.
AOC, you talking about?
Yeah.
Communist. Nick, you got a note. Dylan Davidson. What's up, Nikolai?
Oh,
What's
I
up,
invited him to watch the video.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
We got a week full of news. We like to on Friday night. We like to go over.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't Trump the only president to ever take place in like a walk for life, like against abortion or something? Because I read that President Trump did that.
And how many abortions do you think he paid for?
Yeah,
Like,
they actually found
at the
that.
same time.
Over under is like 6. Probably.
Right. They actually found that
3 more.
Oh, come on! You gotta get on the microphone.
No way, term abortion.
They did a study and they found that the people who had the most abortions were identified as
And he's
Christians.
got 5 kids. Five short.
It makes sense because that's the population.
Yeah.
It's 85% Christian, background, whatever. That includes the people who are, not religious, but they were brought up Christians because here we are in America. So, that's where we're at. Jason's right. You got to get your asses out and vote, and and stop the kind of crazy shit that we see from happening every friggin' week. We call this the Freightcar cruise. We got a lot of freight to unpack. We got a lot of baggage. We got a lot of fucking.
Well, that was the difference, right? Trump didn't get any more votes than Romney or McCain did. The problem was on the Democrat side, much lower turnout. So people just didn't. Everyone expected that Trump would lose. That why bother going out and voting?
Yeah.
I'm not excited about Hillary as a candidate. Well, you see what happens when being not excited leads to not voting, and what the consequences are. I don't give a shit who the candidate is. I'm not a big fan of Buttigieg. I'm not a big fan of Biden. If they're the Democratic candidate, I'm voting for them.
Yeah.
I don't care.
What is their
The
stance
alternative is,
What is their stance on the religious right?
Buttigieg is kind of courting the religious right.
He doesn't want to lose the church people. He wants to make sure the church people know that he loves God and his gay self and his everything else that he's gone through.
That's fine that you say I'm going to hell. Like, I still love your God. It's all just calculation.
He's been doing the right thing. I mean, if he really believes in God, and he really believes that, what I mean, he until he got pinned down on that, and he totally
I mean, that's not the only
Crumpled.
issue, honestly.
Crumpled.
That's not, if that was the only thing that, you know, I felt I didn't agree with him on, I really wouldn't matter. But no, there's a lot of other issues that we don't align on. But I don't care. If he's the Democratic candidate,
He's
then-
the choice,
yeah,
right? And like
he's
Ann
the
said,
guy.
it's the next generation. Whatever the young people really think that they're going to be happy with, because that's the thing. If Trump wasn't ancient, he might not be as willing to do that. He knows he's going to be dead soon, and so he can kind of have a joke with this and make sure that his personal interests are fulfilled. But anybody who looks at the demographic long term, whether we all vote now or we wait until there's just no evangelicals left because no one gives a shit about the stupid hate groups that they all comprise, sooner or later it'll happen. Like I joked before, 80, 100 years. If we all get out and vote, we can make it happen now. But if we just sort of wait until apathy, until the scales tip in terms of the actual voting demographic, and there's just not enough Christians left to support that bullshit, and everybody disagrees with old man Kavanaugh and the other four conservative fuckwits on the court right now, sooner or later it will go the other way. So, don't you think that maybe because he's old and rich and
Well, the entire theme of his presidency has just been setting things up for his company and his kids and making deals and making money. That's why he always stays at his resorts and bills the
Right.
taxpayers for
Right.
all the rooms. That's the one thing that he's doing. All of the other stuff is all politics, right? Pandering to the religious right and to the base of the Republicans. That's politics to try to stay in office and to get everybody on his side. But the actual point of what he's doing in office is advancing his financial goals, which you shouldn't be able to impeach him just on that.
right?
But
I don't know how anyone could have thought he'd have been.
to me, the presidency is irrevocably changed after this president.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And we're getting into politics. But
I shared our video in the Atheist Republic group, and somebody commented. They said, political centrist atheists here. Most atheist groups are dominated by radical leftists. Some so radically leftist that they are not really atheists or humanist groups at all, but simply masquerading as such. I'm an atheist. That said, the sad truth is that some of the most dogmatic, non-data driven, subjective thinking people I've ever met have been fellow atheists. There's a whole plethora of virgin birth equivalent beliefs that they get upset about when challenged on evidence and logic.
she's not wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these atheist groups are about the social justice agenda of the leftists that make up the movement that we're in. And in general, I don't really have an issue with that because it's not going to help to be on the other side in any kind of way.
Well, it is humanism.
It is humanism.
Yeah.
It really is. And again, the right wing people that cry for their the way that they want things are just social justice warriors for their own stupid causes. So, whenever they whine, I'm like, whatever. You're just like everybody else. I'm just sad that things aren't exactly the way they want them every fucking second.
Yeah, be that as it may, when you're trying to go down a secularist path, to have that radical left and to have the social justice warriors spew hate, it really closes the conversation that people who would otherwise listen, who would otherwise want to participate in a conversation of, on beliefs, this is what I believe and this is why I believe. That conversation closes as soon as you encounter a social justice warrior who comes at it from that hateful stance.
That's what's created our friends' better discourse ideas, where the fact that the walls go down on both sides and nobody can talk about anything. I've never seen it so weird and polarized. Dylan says he's fine with politicians being theists as long as they rule using logic and reason instead of religious core beliefs. Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna root out belief in God anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue when it comes to that is really when it comes down to women's rights, because the
That's true.
religious centric politicians tend to want to outlaw abortion, make it impossible to get any kind of like the morning after pill, any kind of contraceptives, and they don't want to teach sex ed in the classroom. They want to, abstinence only, which obviously we all know. We say oh yeah, we've all heard a million times the abstinence only states are the ones with the highest rates of teenage pregnancy and abandoned babies and things like that. But it's the truth. I mean, those are the things that really, when we're fighting against religion and politics, to me those are the biggest issues.
Yeah, the World Health Organization did a study, and they found that the things that lead to the least amount of abortions, obviously, is supporting women, giving them a proper education, easy access to birth control, which the Catholic Church seems to condemn.
If you don't want abortions, that should be your number one.
Yeah.
Right, vote on that. I mean, that's the right thing for a citizen to do.
Right.
Vote on the issues that are important to you.
Yeah.
Jason Love joining in. What's up, Jason? 1 week ago, we were down like every day for the last week and look at the worst stupidity that the Christians have yanked on us. And this one's a great one. Speaking of church and state and politicians, it was 1 week ago. It was February 1st, in fact, that right-wing commentator Chris McDonald, did you hear this one? Claimed that Hillary Clinton made a covenant with the evil one in a new conspiracy theory to kill Kobe Bryant with witchcraft.
Why couldn't she just become president?
Why'd she have to kill Kobe
If
Bryant?
she was going to make a deal with the devil,
She could have killed somebody else.
could have just been president and not killed Kobe. What is the connection between Hillary?
Maybe she didn't meet the devil till after it was too late for that part. This is the only wild conspiracy theory, more conspiracy corner stuff, I am going to ever toss out there on this program. McDonald laughably asserted. I normally don't do this, but this is just food for thought. Question: can a witch cast a spell on something like this to cause death and not be known? This is from Haven't Met His blog. You must have been hurting for one. For one, this
Yeah,
time.
that's a reach.
Yeah, no thoughts on that
No,
one.
no
Great one, man.
thoughts.
That was great.
No, just no,
Yeah,
Not touching it.
no.
this is interesting. What do you think about this? Atheists and agnostics support Bernie Sanders, while Christians and Jews favor Joe Biden.
Yeah, not surprising.
It's a survey.
Well, I mean, Joe Biden's on the more conservative end of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders is more on the progressive end. So, Christians tend to be more conservative. Atheists, agnostics tend to be more progressive. So it's
Progressive
not.
and liberal. So
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense statistically.
it would. Right?
I whenever I hear current polls, I don't listen to polls anymore. I don't listen to surveys because you don't know the science behind taking surveys, the science of polling. You can make numbers up. There's never any justification. You never see the raw scores. I don't believe any of those. What was the source of that poll?
Well, based on the results of Iowa,
Pew
I don't
Research.
think anyone is supporting Joe Biden currently.
Pew Research Center survey of registered Democrats found Friday Biden holds support of 36% of Protestants and a whopping 44% of Black Protestants, 4 times more than any other candidate. Catholic and Jewish voters also lean
Well, that
towards
would make
Biden.
sense. They're not in Iowa. We know that.
While nearly twice as many atheists, agnostics, and unaffiliated voters support either Sanders or Warren. Yeah, again, not surprising. I mean, it really illustrates. And I'm pretty progressive in most ways, but I've never been that guy who can't be in the middle enough to make compromise in politics. I think that's the point of the whole thing. So the ultra left being so tied to atheism, what's it take to get atheism to be about atheism and stop making it always so that people who look at the atheist movement don't see a bunch of the other movements that they're not necessarily interested in, when we might move them as conservative, libertarians, whatever, Republicans, to be more atheist activists if it didn't have that appearance.
Well, I mean, everybody's got their own. There are conservative wings of atheism for sure. You see that in kind of the old guard. We just went through it. David Silverman kind of just moved to the right quite a bit.
We didn't talk about that, did we?
Even though he's always been,
But he's out of
more
atheism now.
the
He touched on-
libertarian. Yeah, well, yeah. there's that whole thing.
Did you see that? Or you touched Rebecca Betzman?
No. I just
Oh God. We'll talk about that. Go ahead. With
yeah, but he's always, even if we discount everything that happened within like the last year with him, he's always been more of a conservative atheist. There's what's his face from Skeptic magazine, the editor.
Michael Sherman.
Michael Shermer. He's more of a right-wing atheist. The group that we came from included quite a few right-wing atheists. I do the podcast with Robert Price, very noted pro-Trump Republican atheist. They're there. It's not, I mean, just because you don't believe in a God doesn't necessarily dictate your politics. But I think when you get into more of the humanism, more of the, what else do you want to do besides atheism? If you want to continue, activism for rights and
yeah, I don't know.
I think that moves you left.
Okay, let me, because I've been struggling because we're getting into politics here, but when we're talking about church and state, how different would this entire conversation be if we said, okay, we know that this person is a non-astrologer right wing. This other person is totally believing in astrology right wing. What difference does that make? What difference would that make in our thinking? Why is it elevated that, a Christian versus not? No, I don't want any bearing on someone's astrology, belief or non-belief, to come into their management and their governance of our country, which is the point. And I no more do I want to legislate thought control. I don't care what you believe in. It just
yeah.
Your view on astrology should not impact your effectiveness in governance, and that is where I believe the conversation should be.
But if you did believe in astrology and you felt that was the most important thing in the world, and that dictated, where you would be spending eternity, and then that would be a big deal to you if someone else believed in astrology or not. And I think that's what it kind of boils down to, is to the believers, that's the most important issue. So that's why you don't have atheist candidates, because the question's going to come, well, if you don't believe in a God, how can you be moral? If you don't believe in a God, how can you do good? If you don't believe in a God, it's to them, it's the most important issue. It's infinity compared to our finite existence. So to them, it matters as much as that. It matters infinitely versus everything else, which is finite.
The final word, finitely. All right. The next one. There's somebody got stoned in Afghanistan, and now they're investigating.
Like
stoned.
Like you're kind of, or
No, like stoned to death, like in a hole. Not that I haven't been stoned in a hole, but horrifying video of Afghan woman cowering in a hole as she is stoned to death by a furious crowd shouting, "Hit her!" and "Allahu Akbar" is investigated by a rights group. So some human rights group is investigating, not the Afghan government, not the United States military. It's probably right there. It's like, if we're gonna get involved in someone's shit, why can't we stop this? Is it not about oil enough? We can't stop priests from molesting kids in America, and we can't stop people from being stoned. Is this anything that we can expect foreign governments to get involved in? We're saying the whole.
What was the crime? Does it say?
A spokesman accused them of the group.
I'm guessing it's going to be some sort of moral outrage.
And scanning down here, and
not that it matters.
Yeah, I don't see the.
But those are the things that usually incur stoning. She probably showed her hair or something.
Rakshana was accused of adultery because she was engaged to a man she did not want to marry.
Moral outrage.
It's not even like
religion for you.
She just because she didn't want to marry. That's all she She just didn't want to marry the man they've arranged for her, and that's adultery. I don't know.
Well, in Islam,
To me, if we're gonna go into foreign countries and make war, then this is where we should start with the friggin' fundamentalist abuse of citizens. Instead of
we're allies with Saudi Arabia. They're the worst country when it comes to that sort of thing.
Richard Dawkins' book, Big Hit in Saudi Arabia. That was a good segue. I actually took that one out, but apparently, Dawkins' book, sold 3 million copies. It's an outrageous number of downloads. I don't know, 300,000. I don't have it because I got
It's one of the
rid
most
it, but,
fundamentalist countries in the world.
Are they having an awakening? Are they having an atheist awakening in Saudi Arabia? Why so many God
Well, they are a
God
theocracy.
delusion books?
So I mean, maybe among some of the people there, but you're never going to the royal family it's based on theocracy, and with the U.S. as their ally, you'll never see a rebellion or an uprising in Saudi Arabia.
No, that's true.
Well, the royal family is beholden to the Wahhabis. I think Christopher Hitchens said it best when he said that the problem with Islamist fundamentalists are the fundamentals of Islam. And when you have a party which has propped up the royal family, which is, and these are the super Islams, these are the super duper believers. You can imagine that the royal family is in a tough spot, that they, to maintain their survival, they have to play to the West to a certain degree, while placating the Wahhabis, which outnumber them and at any point can bury the royal family.
Trump's school voucher program proposal would rob public schools of $5 billion a year. This is my pet peeve, the whole friggin' public money, tax money going to funnel kids to religious schools where they then lie to them about science. And then we're like, why are we falling behind in science and math? Because you're sending kids to retard schools. What the fuck is up with this? This is an American Atheist post. Americans agree public funding is for public schools. Only a small minority, a mere quarter of Americans, support taxpayer money going to religious education. Nonetheless, President Trump and Betsy DeVos, the genius creationist herself, Betsy DeVos, how'd they get rich? The DeVos's? Car money? Pandering to religious extremists at the expense of the 91% of students who are in public schools. Trump's promised in another ridiculous incursion of state on government. He's promised to spread the voucher program, basically, and allow religious parents to use taxpayer money to send their kids to religious schools. How is this permissible? How is this going to be allowed to take place?
On a related note, which maybe is not directly related, it goes without saying, vouchers is a bad idea. It's a very bad idea. We all lose. We all absolutely lose. And last week we talked about it in some detail. But on a side note, I am astonished that there isn't outrage nationwide on this. But having said that, and this is, hear me out on this. Last night I'm there at my girlfriend's, and we're watching, of all things, we're streaming on her Apple TV, Bravo. We're streaming, what was the show? Project Runway. One of the commercials that came up based on her subscription was the ARC experience. Yes, the ARC experience, as if it's a form of Disneyland. And they presented that on Bravo TV as a sponsor of Project Runway, the ARC experience, to teach of the beginnings. That is horrifying. So now we fast forward. If we have Bravo TV, which not the brainiest, and yes, I include myself in on that, not the brainiest audience, but now you have vouchers where you're going to take money to send people to schools that teach things as if they would learn at, quote unquote, learn at the ARC experience. I am in complete.
This is an advertisement you saw?
Yes.
On what? Like a
On Bravo, it's even though you're streaming, you still see advertisements.
It was,
Apple TV.
Yeah,
Mhm.
on Apple TV.
it was on Apple TV?
Yeah.
Or was it on Bravo?
Well, Bravo.
Bravo
is
was
one
one
of
of the things that they have on Apple TV. Yeah. Real friends don't let friends watch Bravo. Bravo's
We're
a
gonna have
fucking
an
devil,
intervention.
man. Honest to God, didn't it start out with like really good old movies? That's why they call it Bravo.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the
it
very
used
first
to-
things that they showed were like, these are movies worth watching again from history. And now it's literally like shit. They made like,
Sorry, Rob. Did it say, is this kind of piggybacking off that one from Montana?
well, no, but you can fold that in. Yeah. It's just,
So what's the reasoning on this one to give to the voucher program instead of building the wall?
I don't know. It's just an American Atheist poster. There's no background. It doesn't tell anything about his actual budget. But it's part of his plan to pander to the right, to the religious right. He's promised that he'll expand the voucher program nationwide.
I guess that plus the prayers in schools. He's gearing up for his reelection.
That's it. I mean, it's all just pandering to the base and saying anything he can to make them cheer. And a lot of it'll never work. But this kind of crap, has a chance to at least fuck up the budget for a while and with stuff that's just a waste of money. How do we get smarter if we let people send their kids to school where they don't get the best education? And if you want to homeschool your kids, maybe you can do that. I don't know, but how does taxpayer money go to pay for religious schools? And the fight on the other side is the religious schools say that it's discrimination not to. Are they going to pay for Buddhist schools and Muslim schools? No, right? I mean, so I don't get how they can even make that argument. But yet it lets people who are deemed smart enough to be on the Supreme Court in this country that we live in argue that it is, and they argue it with a straight face. And sometimes I think they actually fucking believe it.
These days, all it means if you're a Supreme Court justice is you probably shouldn't be alone in a room with
Anybody,
that person.
yeah, especially a new one. God. In some good news, every single UK venue that has now dropped hate preacher Franklin Graham from his intended foray into the United Kingdom. Multiple city tour, had it all planned out one by one when they got a hold of his actual ideas about the LGBT plus community. They all canceled one by one, and he never could even find a venue in London to take him.
Oh no, the cancel culture, the SJWs.
Deplatform. How does Franklin Graham look at this guy? What an asshole! And he says that he's gonna ramp it up. He's gonna go do churches and just speak at churches because no one else will have him. I mean, what an idiot!
That's always what he's done his entire life.
So a bit of good news on the old atheist front, and probably asshole of the week for that one. The Mormons again, and this is another one. The Mormon Church has been exposed as being a business, reaching Roman Catholic proportions, and just a business. It's just a business. It's about making money and keeping people in the machine to make the money. Shouldn't they pay taxes? This is church and state. Shouldn't they pay taxes if they're going to make that kind of money like a business?
All churches should pay taxes unless they can meet the requirements of a charity that any other public charity does.
Agreed.
And if they do pay taxes, then it's going to be all right for them to. Then the Johnson Amendment thing is moot. Then, if they go ahead and pay taxes, can they then?
Yeah, if they pay taxes, they can.
Yeah,
yeah. They
I don't have a problem with it. I'm just asking.
100% endorse the candidate.
That's been an argument against it. You know what I mean? But it's like, why? Why do we care?
They do it anyway.
We know who they want anyway.
It's not like that prevents them from doing it.
It's
They
true,
do it constantly.
and we know who they want.
And the IRS won't do anything about it because of the strength of religion in this country.
Of that religion, those religions, and try to get away with it if you're on the other side. But again, it's the exercise bit. It's always the Protestants.
I mean,
who win.
Scientology gets away with a lot of shit too because they can get themselves called a religion. I wouldn't call them Christian, but the strength of that shield that being called a religion is.
Well, as we said, it keeps people from being prosecuted for all kinds of heinous things, from dead chickens in New York to dead kids in wherever, Idaho.
Yeah, how many people get herpes from moils?
Moil herp. Man, if you're one of those kids who's got that as a story, what if that's your story in college? You're sitting around going, oh, yeah, everybody's got to tell a secret. And I was like, yeah, I got herpes from my moil. What? That's fucked up. Bill Barr. Who loves Bill Barr?
Oh, hey.
He's okay.
His secularism bashing Notre Dame speech is far from over. He has now asserted that he can use his position to do whatever he wants and impose the Judeo-Christian moral system. He's claimed that the founding generation believed that the Judeo-Christian moral system corresponds to the true nature of man and that its standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. Now, you know, we can. He wasn't necessarily really wrong about that part, but the fact is that he believes that all of that gives him the right to impress his. He's not even a Puritan. He's a Catholic, right? He's not a friggin'.
He's from Boston, so I assume.
He's not a. Yeah, he's one of these new neo-Catholic, right wing. It's almost like they're evangelicals, but because they want like Rick Santorum, he's going to deny evolution.
I don't know
to curry favor.
I don't know how religious he is. I've heard.
Okay, so we're talking about Bill Barr, B-A-R-R, not Bill Burr.
Oh yeah,
Bill Barr, yeah, not Bill Burr.
Okay,
totally.
Wish.
Yeah, no, I was confused too. I thought you said Bill Burr.
Yeah, oh, because I went Bill Burr.
Okay, Bill Barr.
Yeah, Bill Barr.
No,
Yeah.
Bill Barr. Okay.
Yeah.
No on Barr, yes on Burr.
Right.
Oh, that picture, jeez.
Yeah, I was
Right,
gonna
that's
say
good.
Leatherface.
It's like an
That's
evil
rough,
Mr.
right?
Potato Head.
But this is what we got. I mean, these are the highest officials of our government.
I know he's the Attorney General.
He's the Attorney General, and he feels like he can
But
use his
White
Christian
shark.
faith to beat people over the head with and
You could
influence.
make a horror movie. You wouldn't even need any special effects.
So that's what Bill Barr is up to.
Well, hopefully he won't be the AG for much longer.
But it also creates the question: what is Bill Burr up to? When does he play again?
He's a little right wing, isn't he?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, well,
He's
not really.
like
He's
the,
anti-PC.
he's the comedian.
He's anti-PC. He's not. Yeah.
Because they don't, they don't want to get booed on stage.
Right. All right. That is. That's what we got on the list.
When I make my old joke about white people are like this and black people are like that, I don't like it when people boo me. That's like every comedian's anti-PC.
Right.
Yeah, I miss George Carlin. He didn't give a damn. He said whatever he wanted, didn't care. He was a real comedian.
He was a great atheist.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're done. Thanks for joining. We'll check you maybe next Friday. I think I'll probably be out of town, but look for the next episode coming out soon. We will check everybody later.
Toot toot.
Toot toot.